Many people ride the New York subway without much thought other than their destination. Of course, the average person might know that the subway is old. Maybe some have even heard of the IRT. That may be all they know. Many do not even know the true age of the subway system. So stick around because in this video I have it all, and much more. The Forgotten Era, a time before what is today recognized as the subway. 1866. The West Side and Yonkers Patent Railway Company is created. This company is awarded the contract to construct the 25-mile-long 9th Avenue Elevated Railroad. Manhattan officials had long sought construction of an elevated line since 1825. Construction of the project began July 1st, 1867, just 2 years after the Civil War had concluded. Now, to give you some other context, the first elevated line, the 9th Avenue Elevated Line, had begun construction before even the Beach Pneumatic Transit Company, which opened in 1870. That's right, the 9th Avenue Elevated was built before the Beach Pneumatic Transit Company's experiment. Many will attribute the failure of Beach Pneumatic Transit to corrupt politicians refusing to fund his project. However, it is more likely that this failure and refusal of funds was because at the same time they were funding the elevated lines, which were seen as the way of the future. Now, I have to add a side note. There was actually a service that would later be incorporated into the BRT. It was called the Canarsie Pier Line. This was a steam dummy line, and it was first owned by the Brooklyn and Rockaway Beach Railroad, and it opened October 21st, 1865. Of course, this existed in the region of Brooklyn called Canarsie. The elevated era begins 1868 through 1901. This time is marked by rapid elevated line expansion and elevated supremacy in Manhattan. Many lines built during this era, however, were lost to the IND Era, which would come later on. July 1st, 1868. The 9th Avenue Elevated Line opens. At the time, it is owned by the West Side and Yonkers Patent Railway Company. The first version of this route started at South Ferry before making its way up 9th Avenue. It would then continue up 9th Avenue past 59th Street at what is today called Columbus Avenue in the Upper West Side. Before terminating at 116th Street, it would cross a turn known as the Suicide Curve. Now, why was it called the Suicide Curve? Well, that is because people were using it to end their lives, unfortunately, as the curve was 100 feet in the air. It is reported that there were up to 11 suicides during 1 year, and that it was becoming harmful to businesses in the area as people would be afraid to shop there, stating that they were fearful that they might be there at the wrong time. By December 29th, 1875, the Manhattan Railway Company is formed, and it would soon acquire Manhattan's elevated subways. By 1876, the Sea Beach Railroad is organized, the company that would later build the original Sea Beach Railroad. 1878 would be a very eventful year for Manhattan's elevated subways. This would be the year that the original 2nd Avenue elevated line opened. This line had stations from South Ferry to 2nd Avenue and 125th Street. It would later merge with the 3rd Avenue line north of 125th Street. The 3rd Avenue line as well opened in the year 1878. This first version of the route extended from South Ferry to 177th Street, East Tremont Avenue. There is as well a Grand Central spur being built off the 3rd Avenue line at the time. Another elevated line, the 6th Avenue line, was as well opened at this time. This line operated as well from South Ferry and moved along 6th Avenue. It merged with the 9th Avenue elevated line near Central Park South, similar to today's D train. Another historical event for New York's subway that would occur this year, the original Brighton Railroad line opens. You can see a picture of a primitive Brighton line station right here. And finally, after 2 years of delay, the Sea Beach Railroad is opened. Later, this would become the BMT Sea Beach Line, which would use the same route minus its terminals. 1880, a small elevated shuttle line known as the 34th Street Shuttle opens. Another event of note, in the year 1883, the Brooklyn Bridge is opened. Later on, this will allow BRT Brooklyn elevated trains to have a single terminal station in Manhattan. In the year 1885, the first portion of the Brooklyn-Lexington Avenue elevated line is built by the Brooklyn Elevated Railroad Company. The first version of the Brooklyn-Lexington Avenue line went from downtown Brooklyn to East New York, terminating at what was then called Eastern Parkway at what is today called Broadway Junction. The Lexington Avenue line also had created and used some stations that are surviving today as part of the Jamaica local line. These stations at this time consisted of Eastern Parkway, Chauncey Street, Halsey Street, and Gates Avenue before it would turn down Lexington Avenue and head towards downtown Brooklyn. In 1888, the Myrtle Avenue elevated line is first opened to Grand Avenue, connecting to the Lexington Avenue elevated line. Another elevated line called the Hudson Avenue elevated line opens off the heel of the Myrtle Avenue elevated line. It would first extend to Flatbush Avenue. The Brooklyn Broadway line is as well opened off the Lexington Avenue line to the East River at the then Broadway Ferry Terminal. In 1889, the Brooklyn Park Avenue section of the Lexington Avenue elevated line is closed. The Brooklyn Fulton Street elevated line is opened. This line would initially start at downtown Brooklyn and would travel above Fulton Street until terminating at Van Siclen Avenue in East New York, Brooklyn. Later this year, the Myrtle Avenue elevated line would be extended to Wyckoff Avenue. The Brooklyn Fifth Avenue elevated line opens as an extension to the Hudson Avenue elevated line. This extension would bring the line to 36th Street and 4th Avenue. By 1893, the Brooklyn-Lexington Avenue elevated line has been extended to Cypress Hills. This is done via the Brooklyn Fulton Street and the Brooklyn Broadway coming off of Halsey Street. Gates Avenue. It should be noted that an extension of the 5th Avenue Brooklyn elevated line occurs via the Brooklyn 3rd Avenue to 65th Street. It is subsequently called the Brooklyn 3rd Avenue Elevated Branch, not to be confused with the Manhattan 3rd Avenue Elevated. Recognizing the need for more rapid transit, the city began planning its first subway line in 1894 with the Rapid Transit Act. In 1896, the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company, otherwise known as the BRT, is formed. This would later become the BMT. The Sea Beach Railroad declares bankruptcy and is acquired by the BRT as a subsidiary. The Brighton Railway is as well acquired by the BRT. It is then connected to the Fulton Street line via what is today the Franklin Avenue Shuttle. I should note that by this point we now have one of the two major competitor companies. In the year 1898, connecting tracks are built across the Brooklyn Bridge to be used by the Brooklyn Elevated Lines. In the year 1900, New York City, not the IRT, starts construction of its very first underground subway line. In the year 1901, the 3rd Avenue L is extended to its final terminal at Gun Hill Road, which would later serve as a lower level of the White Plains Road line, Gun Hill Road Station. The era of mass elevated subway line construction from here on out would be restricted to Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. Manhattan would no longer see massive elevated growth beyond this point, marking the end of the elevated era. However, elevated subway lines were still here to stay in New York City for quite some time. The competitive era, 1902 through 1939. This era is marked by fierce competition, anguish, and most important of all, mass subway construction. Not elevated subway construction, underground subway construction. Most of New York's subway lines are built during this time. In 1902, though not a direct competitor initially to the BRT, the Interborough Rapid Transit Company is formed, commonly known as the IRT. With this, the Manhattan Railway Company was acquired by the IRT along with its elevated lines, which were then on designated as IRT. New York City Transit Contracts 1 and 2 are signed between the IRT and the city. The BRT is excluded from the initial contracts. Under the initial contracts, the IRT Broadway line would be constructed from 242nd Street in the Bronx down to 42nd Street in Manhattan. South of 96th Street, the tunnel would become a quad-track tunnel, whereas north of it, up until Dyckman Street, it would be a triple-lane tunnel. The line would then use 42nd Street as a crosstown until reaching Park Avenue, where it would turn south. The quad-track tunnel would then converge into a bi-lane tunnel south of Chambers Street. At City Hall, a looping terminal station was created to allow trains to terminate at City Hall. This station is now known as the famous City Hall Loop. The line continued to South Ferry, where another set of loops were constructed. An additional IRT tunnel would continue to Atlantic Avenue, where trains would terminate. Additionally, the Lenox Avenue subway line was constructed to 145th Street, as well as a connection to the Bronx. The White Plains Road line would be constructed to East 180th Street in the Bronx. Part of these contracts included the original section that the city had started. Subway lines under this contract were still technically owned by the city, however, they were leased to the IRT company. 1903, the Williamsburg Bridge opens. This is another significant event, as later this bridge will allow for BMT Broadway Jamaica trains to use it to enter Manhattan. 1904, a year that many New Yorkers know. The first subway line in the city is opened under the IRT. Unfortunately for the BRT, it is not a year of growth. Portions of the BRT Lexington Avenue line west of Myrtle Avenue are closed and are then raised. September 11th, 1905. Well, this was not a good day. The 9th Avenue derailment. During the morning rush hour, a train was switched on to the wrong track, causing it to take a sharp turn at 30 miles per hour, a turn which was only meant to handle trains traveling at 9 miles per hour, a company-mandated limit. Unfortunately, for the train and its passengers, it flew off the trestle and derailed, falling down to the street below, resulting in the death of 13 innocent civilians and passengers that day. 48 people would only suffer serious injuries. In 1906, the BRT would acquire the Canarsie Railroad and it would be connected to the Broadway line. August 13th, 1906. By 1906, the BRT was frequently making the newspaper. It had made quite the name for itself. At Coney Island, a baby was being held hostage by BRT police due to a passenger refusing to pay the fare, and the baby was snatched out of her arms until she paid the fare. At the time, a double fare was in effect for passengers riding south of Neck Road on the Brighton line. The BRT enforcement of the fare was quite brutal, including incidents of people being violently beaten and sent to the hospital. The BRT at the time had proclaimed it had the right to kill passengers for fare evasion. Assaults on passengers by BRT employees for fare evasion had certainly become common. The double fare and its enforcement remained in place until the 1913 dual contracts were signed by the BRT, forcing them to stop brutally beating passengers as part of the agreement. On August 14, 1906, police found a girl who had been drowned in the Coney Island Creek by BRT employees. Police attempt to put a stop to it. However, BRT lawyers claim that the BRT employees have a right to kill the passengers who refuse the double fare. When police attempt to put a stop to passenger ejection, the BRT employees instead herd the passengers into a BRT car and sidestriked all of them. As mentioned before, BRT brutality would not end until the BRT would sign the dual contracts, forcing it to stop beating its passengers. The BRT Broadway line is connected to Manhattan via the Williamsburg Bridge, as well as a station being built at Essex Street. In the year 1909, the Manhattan Bridge is opened. The bridge had started construction in the year 1901. 1913. The day is March 19th. The dual contracts are signed by the BRT and IRT with New York City. The signing of these contracts would forever change New York City. As part of the dual contracts, the two companies would build and upgrade existing subway lines as well as elevated lines. The lines would be leased to the transit companies by New York City. Some notable constructions of the dual contracts include the BMT 4th Avenue line, the BMT 14th Street Canarsie Line, the grade separation and reconstruction of the Brighton and Sea Beach lines, the Jamaica Elevated Line north of Cypress Hills, the IRT/BMT Astoria Line, as well as the IRT/BMT Flushing Line. It would be shared between the two. I will explain how that will work shortly. The BMT West End Elevated Line, the lower IRT Broadway 7th Avenue Line, the IRT Jerome Avenue Line, the IRT Pelham Line, the IRT White Plains Road Line north of 177th Street, the IRT Eastern Parkway Line, the IRT Nostrand Avenue Line, the IRT New Lots Line, as well as extensions of some Manhattan elevated lines and upgrades. An extension to the Fulton Street elevated line under the BRT, the Manhattan Bridge tracks were given to the BMT after fierce negotiations and heated debates. The Myrtle Avenue line north of Wyckoff Avenue. Something of note is that the original Queensboro Plaza station had 4 platforms, existing as a doubled version of today's Queensboro Plaza. Yes, 2 platforms formerly occupied the northern half of Queensboro Plaza. There are Queens Plaza, sorry. There are still remnants of these tracks to this day. The northern platforms, which were demolished eventually, were to be used by the BRT trains and would continue to be used by the BMT trains. The IRT trains would use the southern platform, the one that is still in service in the year 2021. The dual contracts stated that the Astoria and Flushing lines were to be leased to the IRT. However, the BRT would ultimately have track rights and, in effect, equal power to the IRT. This would lead to complications, unfortunately, since the companies, in effect, hated each other. The IRT built platforms to IRT specifications in an attempt to lock out the BRT. At first, the BRT solution was to create a separate boarding area for BRT trains by extending the platforms. However, this was proven to be redundant and overly complicated. Ultimately, the BRT would leverage its track rights to force the IRT to make the stations BRT friendly. And another thing of note is that, as mentioned before, the dual contracts, quote, took away the right of the BRT to, as they put it in quotes, kill their passengers. So from this point on, the BRT, to the joy of the people of New York, would no longer have the right to kill passengers. And yes, I never thought that I would say that the BRT proclaimed the right to kill its passengers. That's just, wow, that is absurd. And another bit of absurdity that happened during negotiations, both companies really wanted to build on Broadway south of 42nd Street. Neither of the companies would negotiate on that, and it was a long standstill. The city decided that it would be best to give the Broadway line to the BRT. As the IRT puts it, they were forced to give in to the BRT's invasion of Midtown. They were as well forced to give in to the BRT's invasion of the Manhattan Bridge and its invasion of the South Brooklyn subways. A lot of the lines that the IRT potentially could have had were given to the BRT due to the IRT refusing to negotiate. So, wow, there was a lot of crazy things that happened during this time. In the year 1918, 1916, the BRT closed the Broadway Ferry Spur on the BRT Broadway line. In the year 1918, the BRT completes its upgrades of the Sea Beach line, which is now converted to a subway line. The IRT completes the dual contracts IRT Lexington Avenue line. November 2nd, 1918. The deadliest subway event was the Mulbone Street wreck. More than 100 people were killed when an out-of-control driver took a tight turn at 30 miles per hour when the recommended speed was only 6 miles per hour, and a 5-car Brighton train derailed and crushed passengers in their wooden train car. This occurred on what is now the Franklin Avenue shuttle. The wreck gave Mulbone Street such a bad name that it was renamed to Empire Boulevard. 1920. The IRT Nostrand Avenue line is completed. The IRT Eastern Parkway line is also completed. The BRT Broadway line is connected to the Queensboro Plaza station via the 60th Street tube. An underground connection of the BRT Manhattan Broadway line is built to DeKalb Avenue. Today, this is used by the R train. It is now 1923. Brooklyn Manhattan Transit Corporation, otherwise known as the BMT, is now founded. It is founded to replace the BRT, who declared bankruptcy and is no longer able to function because of this. The BMT founds itself on the hopes of improving customer satisfaction as well as customer service overall, and will not be treating its customers like the BRT once did. June 25th, 1925. A BMT Fifth Avenue elevated train derails at the Flatbush Avenue junction. A truck was crushed during the fall, killing its driver. The derailment was supposedly caused by a broken wheel axle. As well, in the year 1925, the BMT 4th Avenue line is completed. So in 1928, something very critical happens. Gilchrist versus Interborough Rapid Transit, a Supreme Court case occurs. So this was a Supreme Court case that was centered around the IRT attempting to break out of the dual contract limitation of the fare. And with this, city leaders began to, they were alarmed, to say the least, because these transit companies that had been started to operate the subway system had become too possessive over their systems to where you had one of them now attempting to break out of a contract which would effectively trying to gain full ownership of the subway by doing this because it wanted to break out of the dual contracts and raise its fare, which the city would not allow. So following this, there were consequences by the city. In 1932, the city started the Independent Subway, also known as the IND. And from this point onward, New York City would set its sights on directly attacking the IRT and BMT companies. Seeing the writing on the wall, the BMT began attempting to modernize its fleet with the hopes of gaining additional value. It is now inevitable that the death of the company will occur. The BMT made many innovations throughout the 30s, including the introduction of open gangway subway cars. Unfortunately, those were scrapped during World War II for their steel. With the first section of the IND 8th Avenue subway line opening in 1932, the remaining stations of the IND 8th Avenue line would open in the year 1933, which would include the IND High Street as well as J Street Metrotech station. This would begin a gradual assault against the BMT Fulton Street elevated line, and this will continue throughout the 30s, 40s, and 50s. The IND Queens Boulevard line as well opens this year via 53rd Street to Jackson Heights, Roosevelt Avenue. Court Square is not yet opened. The R1 subway cars enter service this year as well, so this is the beginning of the R series subway cars. In 1936, the IND Fulton Street line is extended to Rockaway Avenue. However, the Fulton Street Elevated would continue to operate from Troy Avenue and heading east to Lefferts Avenue, now Lefferts Boulevard, and 119th Street. Service on the Fulton Street Elevated, however, would begin to dwindle from this point on. The BMT was not known to give up on its elevated services and refused to close many of the now redundant stations. The IND Queens Boulevard line is extended to Kew Gardens, Union Turnpike, as well. 1937. The IND Queens Boulevard line is again extended, this time to 169th Street on Hillside Avenue. The IND Crosstown line is completed, now putting the Myrtle Avenue L at risk of demolition. 1938. The start of the end of an era. The IRT was suffering from financial hardships, and the BMT was preparing for its transit leases to end. The elevated lines would soon be in the hands of the city. Unlike the BMT, the IRT was less reluctant to give up elevated lines. At request of the city, a lease is terminated. The IRT 6th Avenue elevated line is closed. It is raised after to make way for the IND 6th Avenue subway line. In 1939, the IND opened a direct branch to the World's Fair called the World's Fair Line. The days of the IRT and BMT were numbered. With the fall of possibly the greatest transit companies in New York's history, a greater risk would loom over the elevated lines in Brooklyn. The IND had won. The IND Era, 1940 through 1968. This era is marked by the IND. This would also spell the end of the L. June 1940th. The IRT and BMT are purchased by the city, marking the end of private transit in New York City. This time, the BMT would not be able to come back. The New York City Transit Corporation would then take revenge on what it viewed as 1800s antiques. June 11th, 1940. Many elevated lines would lose their lives on this day. The IRT 9th Avenue elevated line is closed south of 145th Street, and this portion is demolished. The remaining portions of the IRT 9th Avenue elevated line were thenceforth known as the Polo Grounds Shuttle. The IRT 2nd Avenue line is as well closed and is demolished. Unlike the IRT 9th Avenue line, its replacement would be less forthcoming. The BMT Fulton Street line was no longer protected by the BMT. It was now in the merciless grasp of the IND. It is demolished west of Rockaway Avenue. The BMT 5th Avenue elevated line was closed. severing its connection to the Culver Line. BMT Culver trains would now terminate at the 9th Avenue station's lower level. The ruins of the connection to the 5th Avenue elevated line still remain at 9th Avenue to this day, now as overgrown ramps. A lesser-known 3rd Avenue branch of the BMT 5th Avenue elevated line was also raised. This one traveling via the Brooklyn 3rd Avenue south of 36th Street to 65th Street. And finally, the IND takes one of its own. The IND World's Fair line is closed. It would shortly thereafter be demolished. It was never intended to be a long-term service. Despite the fallen, progress would continue, as it must. 1941. The IRT Dyer Avenue line opens after being converted to a subway line. 1942. The BMT Canarsie line is cut back to Rockaway Parkway. Evidence of the Canarsie Pier line's existence can still be seen today in the shape of some buildings along where it used to run. 1944. BMT elevated service across the Brooklyn Bridge is terminated. 1948. The IND Fulton Street line would continue its push east. By this point, it has reached Euclid Avenue. It should be noted that the original IND architecture was no longer in use by this point. IND stations built before this new era of the IND can be easily distinguished by their basic designs, containing a colored stripe, a station name mosaic, as well as tiles containing the name of the station. An example of a station using the original IND architecture is the IND 8th Avenue 23rd Street station. The original architecture would be most common due to the subway expansions occurring less frequently and in lower numbers beyond this point. 1950. The BMT Lexington Avenue elevated line is closed and demolished west of Gates Avenue. The section from Gates Avenue through Cypress Hills remains in service and is, to this day, used by BMT Jamaica Line trains, otherwise known as J trains. The IND 179th Street station is built on Hillside Avenue. A large array of layup tracks are built east of the station. These were intended to support service further into Queens, as far as Queens Village beyond 200th Street. Sadly, those plans would never be realized. The IRT 3rd Avenue line ends service to South Ferry. 1952. The IRT Bronx Park Spur is closed. Remnants of this still remain off of the IRT East Tremont Avenue station. 1953. The IRT 3rd Avenue line, City Hall Spur, is closed and demolished, of course. 1954. The IND Brooklyn line, also known as the IND Culver line, is completed, now reaching Church Avenue, as well as allowing IND 6th Avenue trains to access Brooklyn. A connection is built off the IND Brooklyn line to Ditmas Avenue on the BMT Culver line, which runs over McDonald Avenue. Culver trains could now use the IND Brooklyn line or the BMT 4th Avenue line. And in 1955, the IRT 3rd Avenue elevated closes south of 143rd Street, thus severing its service to Manhattan. 1956. The IND Fulton Street line is extended to Grant Avenue. The Fulton Street elevated is swiftly pushed back to what is today 80th Street on the A-Line, the section of the A-Line in Queens that goes outside. Instead of continuing its push east, the IND would build a portal east of Grant Avenue. With this new portal, it would then connect to the dwindling BMT Fulton Street line. June 26, 1956. The IND Rockaway line is opened to subways after being converted from a Long Island Railroad branch. August 31st, 1957. Another loss. The Polo Grounds shuttle is closed and demolished. Today, all that remains of the Polo Grounds shuttle are the ruins of the Sedgwick Avenue station, as well as the former site of the connection to the Jerome Avenue line north of Yankee Stadium. That is why the tracks widen out and form a gap there. 1958. An extension to Mott Avenue is built on the IND Rockaway line. And in the year 1961, new rolling stock allowed BMT trains to begin using lettered roll signs. May 21st, 1965. The Metropolitan Transit Authority was formed, otherwise known as the MTA. 1964. The northern track of the Culver Elevated stations connecting the BMT 4th Avenue line are removed. A new shuttle line, the Culver Shuttle, is created to operate from 9th Avenue's lower level to Ditmas Avenue, where an additional terminus track had been built for it. September 12th, 1964. The R32 type subway cars enter service. 1967. The MTA introduces a colored route system to distinguish between lines instead of the former BMT, IND, and IRT system. 1968. All IND 6th Avenue line stations are now completed, as well as a connection to Delancey Street. The IRT Lenox Avenue line is extended to Harlem 148th Street. The Decay Era, 1969 through 1989. The MTA is in charge now. Many of the former elevated lines are now gone. However, a city-owned company would not always take its image as seriously as private companies did. Graffiti and violence would grip the system. The graffiti cancer had taken over and spread to New York City. Expansions would come small and few. For some, the pressure proved to be too much. 1969 claims its first victim. The Myrtle Avenue elevated line is closed and demolished west of Central Avenue, leaving nothing but a small tail of ruins above Broadway. 1972. Construction begins on the IND 2nd Avenue line. Welcome to the 70s. 1973. The remaining portions of the 3rd Avenue line in the Bronx are closed and razed. 1975. A fiscal crisis hits the city, resulting in the end of construction of the IND 2nd Avenue line, which had by this point constructed a 3-lane tunnel beneath 2nd Avenue. 1975. The Culver Shuttle is closed and abandoned. The majority of the structure was later demolished in the mid-1980s. An abandoned trackway remains. Just behind the wall of the southbound platform at Ditmas Avenue, with a slight turn beginning to form at its ends. The ruins of 3 tracks still poke out of the 9th Avenue lower level to this day. As well, the R46 type subway car enters service this year. 1977, another victim is claimed. The last of the R1 type subway cars are taken out of service. Another loss occurs. The BMT Jamaica Line elevated stations are closed east of Queens Boulevard and demolished shortly after. 1979. The modern trunkline color system is introduced. 1985. The Queens Boulevard station of the Jamaica L is closed and razed. 1983. The R62 type subway car enters service, comprising today's 1, 3, and 6 lines. December 11th, 1988. After slow construction and years of delay, the IND and BMT Archer Avenue line is opened. This short branch line, comprising only 3 additional stations, was built to replace the Jamaica Elevated Line stations that were raised north of 121st Street. Sadly, for citizens living north of Parsons Boulevard along Jamaica Avenue who petitioned for the line to be moved underground, the J train would never return, as they had been promised. October 29th, 1989. The IND 6th Avenue line is extended via 63rd Street to 21st Street, Queensbridge. A BMT Broadway line connection was as well built at Lexington Avenue, 63rd Street, as there had been another attempt to restart the 2nd Avenue subway. However, unfortunately, this would fail. Since this track would only be used as a temporary layup track, a fake wall was constructed on the north side of both platforms. 1993. The first of the new technology trains, the R110A, enters service, featuring automated station announcements. 1998. Due to frequent mechanical problems, the R110 series cars are largely taken out of service. Unfortunately, that wasn't the only mishap of the 1990s, for there would be several major accidents. August 28th, 1991, 5 people were killed and more than 200 injured when a train derailed just north of the Union Square station. The motorman, Robert Ray, was drunk and had been traveling at more than 40 miles per hour through a 10-mile-per-hour speed limit zone. He was later convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 15 years in prison. And it was the worst accident that the system had had in 63 years. Another accident would occur June 5th, 1995. A major collision on the Williamsburg Bridge occurred when a motorman who was on his final run of an overnight shift collided with another train, resulting in 50 injuries. Investigators concluded the train ran a red signal at high speeds. Another incident occurred in 1995. 2 months later, August 22nd, 1995, 18 people were injured when a 6 train bypassed a red signal and struck another train that was parked at the Brooklyn Bridge City Hall station. Another incident would occur July 3rd, 1997. 15 people were injured when a Queensbound A train derailed under St. Nicholas Avenue in Harlem as it was Traveling over a switch. The Stagnation Era, 1990 through present day. I had thought of calling this the modern era, but I think that when you compare it to the amount of change that was occurring in previous eras, that this would definitely be more suited as the Stagnation Era. And also by this point, the graffiti is gone. Well, in mass anyway. The year 2000. The R142 type subway cars enter service, now comprising all of the 2 and 5 trains, and it would replace many Redbirds, as well as displacing many R62s. And today, many of the R142As comprise much of the 4-train fleet. And some of us know what happened to the 6. September 11th, 2001. 2 planes strike the Twin Towers. 1 hour and 42 minutes later, the IRT World Trade Center is crushed, along with an R62 type train, as well as numerous casualties. Following this, numerous reroutes occurred in case of further attacks. One notable reroute includes J trains running to Brooklyn to Prospect Park. As well, during this year, a tunnel is built to connect the 21st Street Queensbridge station to the IND Queens Boulevard line, allowing F trains to go via 63rd Street instead of Q trains. 2006. Many R160s begin entering service. These are a new type of subway car at the time. As a result, all R38s and R40s are replaced, as well as most R32s and R42s, originally comprising much of the BMT Broadway line. April 2007. After funding is secured, work resumes on the IND 2nd Avenue line. September 13th, 2015. An additional station is built on the IRT Flushing line called 34th Street and Hudson Yards. An additional station was planned at 10th Avenue. However, due to a lack of funding, its construction would never happen. 2014. The Fulton Center complex connects numerous Fulton Street stations, effectively forming a local Times Square station. January 1st, 2017. Years behind schedule, the IND 2nd Avenue subway line opens. However, due to subway construction in Manhattan becoming far more expensive, stemming from expense to a modern population that is less used to cut and cover construction in their neighborhood, to labor laws artificially increasing the cost, as well as a lack of political will, this line would only open with 4 stations, one of which being from the already prepared Lexington Avenue 63rd Street station built years ago. All 4 stations are notably island platforms, and by this time many R142A type cars were taken off of the 6th line to be converted to R188 type subway cars for the 7 line. Many 8-car R179 type cars would begin to enter service. However, it would not be until 2018 that they would begin their invasion of the A and C lines, as many put it. the last stronghold of the R32 type subway car. 2020. More R179s enter service. The last of the R32 and R42 type subway cars are taken out of service. June 29th, 2021. The first R211 type subway car arrives in New York City. When more are produced, these cars will replace the remaining R46 type cars. Future plans 2022 plus. The first R211 is set to enter service during the summer of 2022. Many more are set to follow. The R211 T-Type will reintroduce open gangways, a feature that has not been seen on New York City's subway cars since the BMT cars were scrapped. The Metropolitan Transit Authority still intends to complete the IND 2nd Avenue line. It is aiming to open an extension to 125th Street and Lexington Avenue by 2030. It later hopes to continue construction to Lower Manhattan. Personally, I am doubtful that Lower Manhattan construction will occur anytime soon unless political willpower swings in its favor. But one thing is for certain, the history of the New York City subway is ever-changing and expansive. I am nothing but a YouTuber compiling information for a timeline, so I can only wonder what the future will bring. Will it bring another wave of expansion? Will it remain a public company? Will the city privatize it again? Will the 2nd Avenue subway even be finished? I can only wonder. This video required hours upon hours of research. I hope you enjoyed it. I had lots of fun making this. I really appreciate everybody who watched.